It's no secret that Kanye West is a controversial artist. He's a genius, but he's a controversial artist. But his latest move has confused even the criminal justice world. In collaboration with Drake, you probably heard about this, the two artists put on an Amazon-sponsored Free Larry Hoover benefit concert. And while ticket sales will benefit several criminal justice reform groups, Hoover was a notorious gang leader who convicted of murder, extortion, and multiple other federal charges. So far, he has served 43 years of the 6 life sentences he was given back in 1978. Justice correspondent Amisha Cross joins us now to talk about this move. Good morning, Amisha. I know you've been talking about it on Twitter. The feds are even baffled as to why he would put on a benefit concert. A lot of people were excited to see Kanye and Drake hit the stage, but you were one of those people that had an issue with the why they put this benefit concert on. Why were you upset about it?
Absolutely. And as you know, Mike, I'm a native Chicagoan. There is a aura around Larry Hoover that particularly, bleeds revenge, breeds upset, breeds a lot of fight. When you're talking about people who are from the South and West sides of Chicago, because his criminal enterprise, the organization, the gang group, when we're talking about the GDs, the Gangster Disciples, this was a criminal enterprise that ran for over 2.5 decades and basically created a very large amount of influence of drugs in the city, cocaine and heroin particularly, but also a lot of gun and gang violence. Some of the highest levels of violence that Chicago has ever seen has been through the era of Larry Hoover's presence. In addition to that, we have to recognize that this man got locked up and was still running his criminal enterprise from prison. A lot of his phone calls were tapped while he was there, but he was telling people where drop-offs were going to be. He was threatening individuals. He was organizing killings. Like, he did this for decades with basically unabated, even when he was sitting behind bars.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here, and I understand exactly what you're talking about because a lot of people are upset about this. But the Hoover supporters, including Kanye, will say, okay, he was over sentenced. His crimes were more drug related. Now he's been a model prisoner over the last few years who's broken peace. And he's already served 43 years old. He's over 70 years old. There are other people who have gotten out of prison for drug related offenses. So how do you respond to them?
I've worked in criminal justice reform for a very long time. It's actually my day job. My mom was a prisoner. I'm somebody who believes in this day in and day out. What I do not support is a former gang member who led a gang enterprise, who was responsible for the murders of hundreds of people across the city of Chicago, who evaded police capture, who, once he actually got locked up, decided to continue running his enterprise from prison. And then a few years later, decided he was going to start a GOTV campaign, somehow funneled money to elected officials, aldermen, as well as the mayor of the city of Chicago at the time. A lot of what we see from Kanye West is this idolization of the man, particularly because of his influence in politics, which I would argue isn't exactly unheard of for criminal enterprises or gang leaders in general. El Chapo had the same type of thing. There are a lot of criminal enterprise leaders who also give money to charity, who also help poor people, who also have very high levels of influence when it comes to politics and dirty money as it associates with it. But Kanye West here, it's frustrating because he has his name, his brand could actually help criminal justice reform, much like his soon-to-be ex-wife Kim Kardashian has been doing for so long. At this point, he has chosen to take on somebody who is not only a stain on Chicago and the state of Illinois, but I would argue on the entire system, because there is no full rehabilitation of a Larry Hoover. We have seen this because this is a guy who literally ran his criminal enterprise from prison. And if you're going to do that, more people are going to die under your name and under your guard. I don't think that there's anything that could be done about that. We have to also remember that this guy is facing both state and federal convictions. That is a huge deal. Even if he was to somehow make his way through the First Step Act at the federal level, it would require a pardon at both the federal level as well as at the state level, the gubernatorial level in the state of Illinois, for him to ever get off. He still faces a 200-year sentence in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, he needs a state and federal pardon because the gubernatorial and the presidential pardon in order for him to get off. But so you're from Chicago. Kanye's from Chicago. He knows what Larry Hoover meant to that city, the good and the bad when it comes to Chicago. So even though this benefit concert is benefiting other organizations in the criminal reform or justice reform system, why do you think he took up this particular cause when he knows what Larry Hoover did in the streets of Chicago?
Because there is a method to Kanye West madness. He said it in one of his songs
Mm,
before. I think that we have to be aware that this is a guy who likes to be provocative. He could have just called this a criminal justice reform concert. Absolutely. Kanye and Drake coming together for any reason is a big deal, especially after the beef they've had for the
hmm
past few years. But he decided to invoke Larry Hoover's name, which honestly, Mike, as you know, this isn't actually helping Larry Hoover's case in any way. But he invoked his
hmm
name because of the excitement, the vitriol, the talk that is going to come out of it. Not because I don't think that he has an idea that this guy is going to get off either. He couldn't even try to wield that deal with former President Trump. There is no way it's going to happen. You also have to recognize that in Chicago, crime and gun and gang violence levels are still very high. So there is absolutely no way in hell that they would agree to in any way supporting this criminal who's been doing it for decades. He's going to serve out his sentences.
Yeah, and Larry Hoover said that, himself through his son, that he didn't even think, he actually thought that this benefit concert would do more harm to his case because it would bring that type of attention to his case than any good. But I want to finish on a positive note because, once again, it wasn't just about Larry Hoover. What's crazy about the whole concert is that outside of the clothing that Kanye and Drake wore, there really was never a mention of Larry Hoover on stage while they were actually performing. But can you take solace knowing that the concert wasn't just about Larry Hoover's situation, but it did benefit other organizations when it came to criminal justice and reform?
Absolutely. And I thank Kanye and Drake for this, particularly because the organizations that they tagged to actually fundraise and benefit for were largely community based organizations. Many of them are organizations that don't get the federal funding, don't get the state funding, and are basically running on a dime to try to ensure that individuals, largely nonviolent criminals who have been incarcerated, or those who have mental health issues who've been incarcerated, those who basically couldn't afford bail and are still sitting in jails and prisons across the
hmm
country, are able to actually have some form of release, or at least have some level of representation when it comes to attorneys. So that's the bigger piece here. And it's being lost in translation because of the Larry Hoover attire and apparel that's currently being sold. But the big story
hmm
here is the fact that there's a lot of great work being done on behalf of these community organizations that are fighting for the incarcerated population.
And what's crazy is I think because it was Drake and Kanye reuniting and that whole situation, I think the reunion and the concert itself overshadowed Larry Hoover, even though he was doing that, because that's why nobody was really speaking out about it, except people like you from Chicago, and making sure that people knew exactly what Larry Hoover had done to the city of Chicago and why he's in prison in the first place. As always, Amisha, you bring it. We appreciate you. Thank you for starting your day with us this morning.